All right, well, we're joined alongside a best-selling author and college football reporter, Bruce Feldman, and the author and writer of the latest article about South Carolina's LaNorris Sellers. First off, Bruce, thank you for coming on and taking the time. And with the busy college football off-season sort of becoming preseason, what inspired you to want to write this article about LaNorris and his journey so far?
Noah, I knew he was a really good player. I'd watched him last season, but I didn't know a ton about his backstory. I had seen also coming out of the draft that a lot of these too early 2026 draft projections, he was a top five guy. And I was like, started to read more about him. And he didn't have a ton of power offers. He had a couple of them, but really it was like he had technically, I guess, three if you look at 247, but one of them or two of them were from basically the same staff. It was the guys at Virginia on offense who end up to go to Syracuse, and that's where he was committed. And so when I had talked to his high school coach, uh, it was great it was a great perspective on a lot of things. And he said, look, I stood on the table for him a lot. Couldn't even get some smaller schools around us to offer him. And his dream school is North Carolina. He reached out to North Carolina several times. They weren't interested. Obviously, Clemson in-state was not interested, but even South Carolina, where obviously he is now, they didn't offer him till late October of his senior season. And for a quarterback, that's really late in the process, right? And so when I talked to Shane Beamer for the story, he said, look, his team was in our 7-on-7 camp, and he was clearly really impressive, but we still told him, hey, we want to see some of your senior film. And so they did, and Shane kind of raved about what he was watching every Friday when he would watch prospects, but they still didn't offer him until till late in October. So it's fortunate how it worked out for the Gamecocks because obviously, sometimes you wonder, it's like, okay, was there something else that was like holding up the process? But you had a kid who was a great student, great character. I mean, like with capital G, great. In these, I talked to his parents. Parents were awesome. Everybody, like his support system's great. The people around there. One of the things that, I remember when I talked to LaNorris, we talked about it was like fifth grade, like he was in a talented gifting program, and his fifth grade teacher was the one who first, kind of planted the seed in his head about wanting to be an architect. He said, I still want to do that. Just like a really impressive guy who's still only 19.
Yeah, and in those conversations, I guess like what did you find was it that was making these schools hesitant about him, or even Shane Beamer, South Carolina, initially a little hesitant? What was that?
I think for different schools, it's probably different reasons, where they may have liked somebody else. I know that, it looked like South Carolina had some other guys they had targeted first, Dylan Lonergan, who ended up transferring is now, at Boston College, and Eli Holstein, who also transferred now is at Pitt. I think there was one other quarterback in there, and it's quarterbacks are like dominoes. They kind of, it gets a certain way. And I think because he was local, I think sometimes there was a little bit of hesitation, but also, when I asked Shane, I was like, you told me how impressive he was. He was like, yeah, but 7-on-7 is still a little bit different from actually, football itself. And so I get that. I mean, it worked out really well. They basically had, as it turned out, about a week to 10 days to flip him from Syracuse. And his mom played a big role in that, in sharing that perspective. And certainly Dowell Loggins, who was the OC the past years and is now the head coach at App State, he played a big role. Um, but I just think it was, you also had the factor of he had a season-ending injury in his junior year when he started to blossom. And so I think if maybe he doesn't have that injury, he might blow up his junior year and start to get a lot more attention. But again, great size, really athletic, strong arm. And again, the thing that really, it's honestly one of the reasons why when you reached out to me, I was like, yeah, I want to talk about LaNorris because I think LaNorris is a really cool story. Like he's one of those guys right now, and they are out there, but he's definitely one of those guys where you're like, okay, this is a person who should be getting a lot of attention, like because he deserves it. And character wise, he's, like I think the perspective is great and the people around him, there's not a lot of pettiness. Sometimes you get that, like, like there's a private quarterback he's had since quarterback coach since sixth grade who's all over that region and has drives, like they drive to meet each other and everything on weekends. And it's just like sometimes you get the high school coach who'd be like kind of a little jealous, like a little bit of petty stuff. There's none of that around LaNorris's story. It's just like people who are like, hey, this is a really awesome kid and we're going to support him. And, the parents have done a great job with that. And so that's why I loved working on the story. And that's honestly why like I'm sitting on the floor in our guest bedroom talking to you on a hot day.
Well, again, we appreciate it, and you've talked to, throughout your career, plenty of players and high school coaches and college coaches, and I guess in these conversations, and you sort of alluded to it there, what stood out to you that you went, okay, this kid, this player, this family is different than, the majority of people you talk to.
So the stuff that stood out to me to get me to do the story was he's a really just dynamic playmaking quarterback. That was like I didn't know all the other stuff, but as soon as after the first call I did was with his high school coach, I immediately like texted my editor and I was like, this is going to be an awesome story because of like the stuff that his coach had told me. And then when I talked to his parents, I think I talked to his mom first, and her energy is just bursting through the phone. She's funny. She's like, sometimes a sense of humor, like, some of it I think came through in the story, but I think just like, it's just really cool. And then by the time I got to him, and, he was, he's just like they said, he's an old soul. I was like, yeah, he's a really mature 19-year-old. And I think those things, in terms of like the character stuff, about how Dal Loggins said, a lot of recruits you talk to, they really want to know about what's the NIL plan. He was like, he asked about everything but the NIL, and he asked really good questions. He didn't really seem to care about the other stuff. And I think that's the cool thing about this situation is this quarterback and this family and these people around him have seem to have done a very good job of keeping the main thing the main thing.
And his character is obviously something that stands out about him. Do you know, but now he's in a different spot this time this year than he was this time last year. Can you think of, other examples where a quarterback is so under the radar one year and Heisman candidate, top five projected draft pick the next year, and typically how do those guys pan out in that year now with expectations?
It's a good question. Like, there's guys you see, it's almost happens every year where there's somebody who is not on the, like people are buzzing about in the draft, and then that year they blow up. So they have that one great year. Like Jaden Daniels was obviously a good quarterback at LSU, but he went from good to great and he won the Heisman and obviously, was a top five pick. Joe Burrow was pretty good the one year he started at LSU, and then the next year he was all-time great, quarterback, and he really blossomed. And so they have that. What's different, I think, with LaNorris is, he redshirted and he learned, and I think that there were some rocky moments, and it's I get why people bring up some of the things that weren't great when they saw him earlier in the season, and some of it could have been just inexperience, and also it's like one returning starter around on the offense, and some of it was like he struggled against Ole Miss, but he was Loggins was like he probably shouldn't have played that game because he was coming off a high ankle sprain and he was not close to 100%. And so I think with him, you have this, especially the second half of the season, a lot of these wow plays, but he's still only 19. So he has this year and maybe 2026 as well. Because I mean, even if things go great, and so let's say he leads South Carolina in the playoff, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But if he does that, does he get tempted to go into the NFL draft? He still won't even be, this time next year, he'll still only be 20. As one of as his, I think his high school coach told me, it was like, he probably won't be able to drink alcohol at his draft party.
Good
But maybe
point.
he stays another year after this. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, you never know, especially with, well, again, this doesn't seem to matter to him, but with the way NIL changes, that might
Yeah. I mean,
change things.
he's driving a very, very nice car right now. And I think he's going from a very nice car to an exceptionally nice car, like, I don't know, probably in a couple more months.
Yeah, no, I could see that. And you reported on I think it was $8 million offer that another school had for him to transfer. I'm curious, in the world of college football we're living in, is that sort of figure for a top quarterback, is that normal, or was that something that because of Sellers, all the intangibles you mentioned, like that was a top end offer you've heard about?
Well, so what his dad told me was like 8 million for 2 years, but that's similar to the number that was reported for another quarterback who transferred into the ACC, Darian Mensah. Now, I don't know if the Mensah number is exactly that. That's what it was reported. But I do know this. I mean, if you ask me who is the more impressive quarterback, the guy who did really well in the AAC at Tulane, or the guy who did really, really well and then beat Clemson on the road as a redshirt freshman. I mean, if one guy is getting 4 million a year, I mean, this guy is probably worth six or north of that, because he's kind of the franchise quarterback there. And he's still really young. He's still, it was his first year as a starter. I think he's going to get much better as a passer. I mean, I'm not saying he can't get better as a runner, but you're talking about, you saw the highlights. I mean, he is a spectacular player. And Dow Loggins, he coached Vince Young in the NFL. I mean, you got a guy who's more polished probably already, and he's as fast. He's a stronger runner, and the intangibles and the work ethic and all those things are A plus. So it's going to be fun to see what he does from here.
Absolutely. We've had the privilege of, following him every game and being field level and having our high definition cameras on him, and like he's a magician out there. It's remarkable to see him. I think it was the second play of that Clemson game last year that was one of the more unbelievable escapes I've ever seen. Um, but on that note, what are you hearing is like maybe not a flaw, but if he improves at this, okay, he's top five for sure. That's everything's in front of him.
I think just probably, going through progressions as a quarterback. He played behind a really shaky offensive line last year. And I think some of that, in addition to inexperience, I think those things are gonna develop for him. I just think he's got a strong arm. He's a really good deep ball thrower. I just think with like the intermediate pass game and some of those things that people are gonna want to see on 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 12 when, hey, you know what, you're not going to be able to take off and run for every first down in the NFL. That's the stuff that I think people are looking forward to seeing. But again, when you get the intelligence and I think you get some of the awareness that he has in the work ethic, there's no reason to think that box will not get checked off in a big way over the next year too.
Absolutely. And there's a lot that's changed with the South Carolina team as a whole, a lot of defense left in the draft, a lot to kind of fill in that aspect of things. But with Sellers, as he played last year and potentially improving this year, what do you think is the ceiling for this Gamecock team with LaNorris Sellers?
I think it's not a stretch to think you have on the other side of the ball, you have also a guy who was a true freshman, but now is a sophomore, second year sophomore. One of the best defensive players in college football. As an edge rusher in Dylan Stewart. I mean, he is a potentially dominant player. And then you have an elite quarterback with some athletic receivers. I don't think there's any reason to think, oh, they can't be a playoff team. Right now, there are teams that I think like if you look at it, there's obviously no SEC East and SEC West anymore, but if you look kind of around them, um, you know, they they're going to be a tough matchup for people because they have a guy who's going to be able to convert first downs and make plays, and now is from everything I heard, has showed a lot of leadership late in the year, especially at Clemson. So I think I don't know if I would say right now, oh, I feel like they're definitely a playoff team, but I think that's realistic because you have a great talent and a great player on defense and a great talent and a difference-making quarterback. I mean, those are really good building blocks to have around. And it's not just them, but those are the headline guys.
Absolutely. You're going to make a lot of Gamecock fans' day with those comments. And it is funny, and you mentioned in the article about the Old Dominion game last year, the energy completely different last year, even just going into the season, because how the prior season went, a lot of fans were, excited but tentative. And after that Old Dominion, they were like, throw in the towel, another mediocre team, it's over. And now there's the reverse of expectations because of Sellers and Dylan Stewart. And it's definitely a different energy here in Columbia.
Yeah, I went back and watched that game like as I was writing the story, and you get that situation where they're down by a field goal. It's at midfield. It's not like ODU is like Boise State or like a great group of five team, and so they're down by three. They're at midfield. They have like a third and three, and I mentioned in the story, and I think he has an open receiver he could hit. He goes downfield, doesn't, and then they're going for it on fourth and three, and the left tackle false starts, and you hear it like it goes from groans to boos. And fortunately, and I think it was Dylan Stewart who makes the big strip of the quarterback, inside like the 10, and they end up, LaNorris ends up running it in from like the three to give them the win. But yeah, I could see how people could watch that game and go, I don't know about this. But again, first year starter. And one thing that was reminded me as I'm listening, Aaron Murray, the old Georgia quarterback, I think was the analyst. He was like, they only have one returning starter back on offense. Like that's not an easy thing to bring in when you have a new quarterback and really like, yeah, Rocket Sanders is talented and had been, really good at Arkansas, but that's tough when you have so many kind of new pieces trying to come together at the same time.
Yeah, and it felt like every week in his daily press conferences, Shane Beamer was reminding us and the fans that hey, he is only 19 or 18, and it is a first year offense, and it is going to come along. So he was, you know, trying to tell everyone to calm down early in the season, and obviously the season went how it panned out, and now he's where he is. So it's been an interesting journey to see that happen, and now to see where it can go this year.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like I brought this up to Shane, and I've known him since he was like the long snapper for his dad's team and whatever it was 25 years ago. But like he was clearly, he was around Mike Vick. He was a teammate of his. So obviously that's like a legendary talent. But when he was at Oklahoma, he was there with Kyler Murray wins a Heisman, and then Jalen Hurts transfers in. And so he's been around really special quarterbacks. And I think Jalen has great leadership capacity. I remember being around that Oklahoma team and knew what, obviously, he's gone on to a Super Bowl in the NFL, but you see it. The other guys were, I think especially Michael Vick was just kind of like almost a superhero athletically. But you have some, he has a perspective on like, okay, what does this look like? What is this process like? And a lot of the stuff you were just referencing about like Shane at his press conferences trying to maybe preach calm and whatnot. I think that is something, and I'm guilty of this too, where you make overreactions and in college football especially, and you see something, you forget, hey, these guys might get better or whatever. Like, and I, when you watch something back, maybe years later, you're like, oh yeah, those guys were not that good at that point. But then it's like a whole different team as they mature and come together.
Yeah, I think it was before, I think even the Old Dominion game, Shane, and he prefaced it in mentality, not in play at that point, although now they're kind of similar. He said LaNorris reminded him of Jalen Hurts when he coached Jalen in Oklahoma. So he said that before he even really took a snap as a starter, that this is a guy, in terms of what he's got inside, that reminds me of Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a mouthful. Just I remember I thought Jalen was, I mean, he's super strong physically, not just weight room wise, but he's also like super strong mentally. And I think you kind of get that vibe with LaNorris in different ways. I think in terms of just because he is so smart. And I think when you have really, really smart people in that position, I think it's fascinating to watch them as they try to take over a team. In one case, the guy came from Alabama where he was like, I know what it looks like because we were winning national titles. In the other case, you have a guy, it's like, can I really take these guys over? Because I'm only, I just turned 19 and I haven't started yet. Now I'm starting, but I think now it's all downhill from there.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll let you get up off the floor. If you haven't already, go read his article on The Athletic on LaNorris Sellers and his journey so far. It's really, really good, really informative, and I really appreciate the time, Bruce.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Noah.
All right, thank you.